I was sitting in my son's living room, still numb from the cancer diagnosis, when my son-in-law pressed $300 into my pocket. "That's enough to get you back to the old house," he said. My son stood by the door with my suitcases. "Dad, we can't carry this burden anymore." Minutes later, they pushed me into a taxi as rain hammered the windows. But when I reached the house I hadn't entered in 15 years, my old neighbor was waiting on the porch with a warning I will never forget. "I cannot tell you how much it means that you chose to spend this time here. Tell me in the comments, where in the world are you joining from? Your city, your country, I want to know." Please note, some elements of this story are fictional, added to deepen the experience. Names and settings are not drawn from specific individuals, but the lesson at the heart of this story belongs to all of us. I have spent my entire career building bridges, not the kind built from promises or hollow words, real bridges. Steel cables and reinforced concrete spanning rivers and mountain passes across California. For 31 years, I worked as a senior structural engineer for Caltrans. In the final years of that career, Caltrans contracted its major bridge projects to Pacific Span Construction Group, the largest private infrastructure firm in the state. I worked alongside their teams on 11 projects. When I left Caltrans in 2001, Pacific Span offered me a senior consultant position, then eliminated it 4 months later, keeping every design specification and patent calculation I had produced without paying the licensing fees attached to them. I never once applied that same precision to the people I loved most. My name is Arthur Pendleton. I am 65 years old, and on a Tuesday night in November of 2024, I sat in the corner of my son's living room in Beverly Hills while my family decided what to do with me, the way you decide what to do with furniture that no longer fits the room. Marcus Webb was my son-in-law, 42 years old, a litigation attorney whose handshake felt like a negotiating tactic. He stood at the kitchen island, tapping a silver pen against the granite in a slow, rhythmic beat that had been drilling into my skull for 20 minutes. "The oncologist's estimate was 300,000, he said, not looking up. "Stage 1 treatment at Cedars-Sinai, and that number assumes the progression stays stable, which he specifically said he could not promise." My daughter Chloe leaned against the refrigerator with her arms crossed, her knuckles white, where her fingers gripped her own elbows. She had been crying before I walked in. I could tell by the way she was breathing. My son Julian walked in from the hallway carrying 2 suitcases. My suitcases. He set them down beside the front door with a thud that made Chloe flinch. "Dad." His voice had the careful softness of a man delivering news he had rehearsed. "We think it would be best if you went back to Lancaster, to your old house." Marcus reached into his jacket and pressed a folded stack of bills into my shirt pocket with 2 fingers, the way you tip a valet. $300, he said without expression. "There's a cab waiting." I looked down at my pocket. The bill sat there folded neat and impersonal as a receipt. Something moved through my chest, slow spreading heat that burned behind my eyes until I had to set my back teeth together. I reached into my trouser pocket. My fingers found the key, old brass rust spot near the bow carried in my wallet for 15 years, without ever consciously deciding to keep it. The key to the Lancaster house. Mary's house. "Tell me something, Julian." My voice was steady. I was proud of that. "When you picture your mother, where do you see her?" His mouth opened, closed. "I see her in that house," I said. "Every time." I picked up my suitcases and walked out into the rain. 2 hours later, the taxi turned onto Miller Creek Road. The gravel crunched under the tires. I leaned forward and stopped breathing. The porch light was on. The house had been empty for 15 years. I had not called ahead. I had not told a single person on this earth that I was coming tonight, and the porch light was on. Thomas Hartwell's office occupied the entire northeast corner of the 22nd floor of a glass tower on Wilshire Boulevard, with a view of the city that on clear days stretched all the way to the Pacific. It was the kind of office that communicated without saying a word, that the man who worked inside it had never once lost a case he truly needed to win. Thomas himself was 62, lean and silver-haired, with the permanently composed expression of a man who had been delivering catastrophic news to wealthy clients for 3 decades and had long since made peace with the weight of that work. He had been my corporate attorney since the year I was first appointed to the bench. In 30 years, I had never seen him flustered. He was standing at the window when I came in, looking out at the city. He turned when he heard the door. One look at my face and he walked directly to his desk, sat down and said, "Tell me everything." I did. 20 minutes. No interruptions. When I finished, Thomas sat back in his chair and pressed his fingertips together and stared at the ceiling for a long moment, the way he always did when he was building something complex inside his head. Then he leaned forward and said, "Arthur, how much liquid capital do you have access to outside your primary trusts?" "Enough," I said. "Whatever we need." He nodded slowly. "Then here is what we are going to do." He opened his legal pad, yellow, same as mine, the universal document of men who had spent their lives in courtrooms, and began to write as he talked. "First priority is the irrevocable trust," he said. "We transfer your real assets, the warehouse properties, the investment accounts, the family holdings into a Harrison family irrevocable trust properly structured and recorded under California law. Once those assets are inside, they are legally unreachable. Even if Julian wins the conservatorship, there is nothing left to control." He looked up. "But the transfer must be documented cleanly and predate any fraud claim. I'll structure it to withstand challenge." "How long?" I asked. 3 weeks minimum for the trust to be legally unassailable." He paused. "The debt purchase will take 4. "We have 3 weeks before the conservatorship hearing," I said. Julian filed an emergency expedited motion. Thomas's pen stopped moving. "I know," he said. "Derek Solis's information was correct. I pulled the court filing this morning." He met my eyes across the desk. "Under California Probate Code 1820. Julian qualifies as an interested person by virtue of his marriage to Clara. The court will appoint a court investigator, a CI, who will visit you, assess your condition, and submit a report to the judge. Given 4 months of manufactured medical decline carefully documented in your health records, that CI report could go badly." The word manufactured landed in my chest like something dropped from a height. "Then we need to move faster than 3 weeks," I said. "We will," Thomas said. "I'll offer the bank a premium above principal on the debt purchase, 7, maybe 8%. Banks don't love holding commercial fraud risk. They'll move." He wrote something on the pad. "Simultaneously, I'll file the trust documents this week. We'll be done before the CI even schedules a visit." He set his pen down and looked at me directly, not as my attorney for a moment, but as the man who had known me for 30 years. "Arthur," he said carefully, "once we start this, Julian will know someone is moving against him. He may go after Clara." My jaw tightened. "Clara will be protected before we trigger anything," I said. "I'll make sure of it." Thomas studied my face for a moment. Then he nodded, apparently satisfied with whatever he saw there, and picked his pen back up. "The acceleration clause," he said, returning to the legal pad. "When we purchase the commercial debt through the blind trust, we become the sole creditor on Julian's fraudulent loan. Standard commercial loan agreements contain what's called An acceleration clause, a provision that states if the lender discovers material misrepresentation or fraud in the origination documents, the entire loan balance becomes immediately due, not in 30 days, not in a week. He tapped the pen against the pad. In 24 hours, full principal, penalties, and interest. If Julian cannot produce $4.2 million in cash within that window, we have the legal right to seize every asset attached to the loan and to refer the entire fraud package directly to federal prosecutors. He said all of this in the same tone a man might use to describe the weather. And Julian will have no idea who the creditor is, I said. Not until we want him to, Thomas said. The blind trust is impenetrable. His name, your name, neither appears anywhere on the surface. As far as Julian Mercer is concerned, he is dealing with an anonymous financial institution that purchased his debt on the secondary market. Thomas allowed himself the smallest possible smile, which is entirely legal, entirely common, and entirely his worst nightmare. I sat with that for a moment. The city stretched outside the window, all that light, all those lives moving through their ordinary Tuesday afternoon, completely unaware that in this corner office on the 22nd floor, the architecture of a man's destruction was being quietly assembled. Do both simultaneously, I said. The trust and the debt purchase, this week. It will be expensive, Thomas said. I know. And once we trigger the acceleration clause, there is no going back. The federal process takes on its own momentum. I know that too, I said. Thomas looked at me for one more long moment. Then he reached for his phone. He had dialed 2 digits when it rang in his hand. He glanced at the screen, frowned slightly, and picked up. His face as he listened did what Thomas Hartwell's face almost never did. It went pale. He set the phone down and looked across the desk at me with an expression I had not seen on him in 30 years of difficult conversations. Arthur, he said quietly, Julian just filed a supplemental motion this morning. He's requesting the hearing be moved up. Emergency expedited 3 weeks becomes 2. He paused. We have 14 days. My hands pressed flat against my knees. 14 days. Then we start tonight, I said. The combination was our wedding anniversary. June 14th, 1983. 140683. I turned the wheels without hesitating, without having to think about it, because some numbers live in your hands rather than your head. The lock released with a clean snap, and the lid lifted on hinges that moved more smoothly than they had any right to after 15 years. The smell hit me first. Old paper and cedar and something faint beneath both of those, a perfume I could not name but recognized instantly, in the way you recognize a voice before you see the face. My eyes burned all over again, and I had to press my lips together hard before I could look inside. The box contained 3 things. A stack of financial documents bound with a rubber band, the pages slightly yellowed at the edges. A thick legal folder stamped with the name Samuel Vance, Attorney at Law, Lancaster, California, and a notebook, dark blue, college ruled, the kind you buy in a drugstore for $2, with Mary's handwriting on the cover in black marker. Personal Journal, MAP 2009 to 2010, Mary Alice Pendleton. She had always initialed things that way, even grocery lists. Take your time, Thomas said from across the table. His voice was low and steady, the voice of a man who had learned to wait without filling silence with noise. I picked up the notebook. The first entry was dated January 3rd, 2009. Her handwriting was the same as I remembered it, slightly right-leaning, the letters fully connected the way they taught cursive in Catholic schools in the 1970s. Reading it felt like hearing her speak from another room. Arthur is in Sacramento this week for the Route 50 bridge inspection. I made soup and ate it alone at the kitchen table, and thought about things I do not usually let myself think about. Julian called this afternoon. He asked about Dad's retirement accounts again. Third time this month. I told him I wasn't sure of the exact figures. He pushed. I changed the subject. He let me, but not without a pause that told me he didn't want to. I turned the page. February. Marcus came for dinner. He brought a bottle of wine that cost more than our first car payment and spent most of the meal talking about a property deal he was structuring in Malibu. He asked Arthur about the mineral survey reports from the Lancaster parcel. Arthur doesn't know we have mineral survey reports. I do. I've known since the county assessor's filing in 2006. I did not tell Marcus this. I said I wasn't sure what he meant. He smiled at me in a way I did not like. My hands tightened on the notebook. I was aware of Thomas watching me, but I could not look up. I turned to March, then April. Entry after entry written in the careful, methodical way that Mary had always approached things that troubled her, not with panic, but with documentation. She listed dates and conversations and specific questions Julian and Marcus had asked. She noted inconsistencies. She recorded loan requests from Julian. $3,000 in February, $5,000 in April, always with the same soft-spoken explanation about cash flow, and always with the same promise about repayment that never came. He asked me not to tell Arthur she had written in May. He said Arthur worries too much. I don't believe that is the reason. Thomas, my voice came out rough and stripped down. Did you know about any of this while it was happening? Thomas leaned forward and laced his fingers together on the table. Some of it, he said. She didn't tell me everything at once. She told me in pieces over about a year. She was trying to be sure before she moved. He met my eyes steadily. Mary was not a woman who acted on suspicion. She acted on evidence. I nodded and turned to October of 2009. The entry was longer than the others. The handwriting was slightly smaller, more compressed, as though she had been trying to fit a large thought into a small space. I found the brake fluid this morning. Julian borrowed the car last Thursday to drive to Palmdale, said his BMW was in the shop. He returned it Friday evening and said thank you and kissed me on the cheek the way he always does. This morning I went to back out of the garage, and the pedal felt soft. I checked under the hood. The reservoir cap was loose and the fluid level was low in a way that does not happen naturally. I am a former accountant, not a mechanic, but I know what a brake fluid reservoir looks like when it has been interfered with, because I asked Thomas to show me 6 months ago when I first started keeping this journal. The words blurred. I blinked hard and kept reading. I have been sitting with this for 3 hours now. I have thought about calling the police. I have thought about confronting Julian directly. I have thought about telling Arthur when he gets home from the bridge project in Fresno on Thursday. And I keep coming back to the same problem. If I make noise now, if I go to the police or tell Arthur or make this into what it is, Marcus will know that I know. Marcus is not a man who leaves loose ends. Arthur is a loose end. Arthur has always been the loose end in this equation, because Arthur is the one standing between them and everything they actually want. I will not put him in that position. I have thought about it from every angle, and I keep arriving at the same place. So here is what I am going to do instead. I had to put the notebook down. I pressed both hands flat on the table, fingers spread, and stared at the wood grain, and breathed through my nose until the tightness in my chest loosened enough to speak. She knew, I said. My voice did not sound like my own. It sounded older. She knew what that loose brake fluid meant, and she got in the car anyway. Yes, Thomas said. His own voice had gone very quiet. She got in the car to protect me. Yes, Arthur, Something broke open in the center of my chest, not dramatically, not all at once, but slowly, like a structural failure that begins with a single crack and then propagates through the material faster than the eye can follow. 15 years I had lived with the image of Mary dying in a car accident on Highway 14 on a Tuesday morning in March. 15 years I had told myself it was random, senseless, the kind of thing that happened to good people for no reason. I had built an entire internal architecture around that belief. It was not random. It had never been random. She had chosen it. She had calculated the risk with the same precision she brought to everything in her life, and she had decided that her death was the price of my safety, and she had paid it without telling me, without giving me any choice in the matter. I pushed back from the table and stood up and walked to the kitchen window and gripped the edge of the sink with both hands, because I needed something structural to hold on to. Outside, the rain had slowed to a thin drizzle. The desert beyond the glass was dark and enormous and quiet. She should have told me, I said. My knuckles were white against the sink edge. My voice cracked straight down the middle on the last word, and I did not try to stop it. Thomas, she should have told me. I would have found another way. I would have... I know, Thomas said from right behind me. I had not heard him stand up. He put one hand on my shoulder firm, the way men of a certain generation communicate things they cannot say, and left it there. I told her the same thing. She said... He stopped. What did she say? He was quiet for a moment. She said, you would have tried to fix it yourself. She said that was the thing she loved most about you, and the thing that would have gotten you killed. I stood at that sink for a long time. The rain dripped from the eaves. The furnace ticked and breathed through the walls. Behind me on the table, the blue notebook lay open to the page where my wife had written out the logic of her own sacrifice in neat, careful cursive. When I finally turned around, Thomas was back in his chair, watching me with the patient steadiness of a man who had been waiting 15 years for this specific night, and was in no hurry to rush the rest of it. I walked back to the table. I sat down. I looked at the legal folder with Samuel Vance's name on the cover and the rubber-banded financial documents beside it. There's more, I said. It was not a question. There is considerably more, Thomas confirmed. But I think you need some water and about 10 minutes before you read the rest of it. He was already getting up to fill the glass. I did not sleep that night. I sat at the kitchen table until somewhere around 3 in the morning, when Thomas finally said he was going home to get a few hours of rest and would be back by 7 with breakfast. He left the metal box on the table and the legal folder exactly where it was, and did not push me to read any more of it that night. That was the right call. I was not capable of reading any more of it that night. I made myself a cup of coffee from grounds Thomas had stocked in the pantry, another part of his 15-year arrangement with Mary apparently, and I sat in my father's old chair by the fireplace and watched the flames, and did not think, or tried not to think. Mostly, I held the blue notebook in my lap, with my hand resting on the cover, and listened to the desert go quiet around the house as the rain finally stopped somewhere before dawn. When the sky outside the kitchen window began to lighten, from black to gray, to the particular pale gold that only happens in the high desert, I got up, washed my face, changed my shirt, and walked outside. The air hit me like a clean slate. That is the thing about Lancaster that nobody who has not lived there fully understands. The air in the morning before the heat builds has a clarity to it that Los Angeles has not been able to manufacture in 50 years of trying. It smells of dry sage and cold sand, and something mineral and ancient underneath both. I stood on the porch and breathed it in until my chest stopped aching quite so badly, and then I walked down the front steps and kept walking. Miller Creek Road was quiet at that hour. A pickup truck passed me going the other direction, the driver lifting 2 fingers off the steering wheel in the way that passes for a full greeting in small California towns. A dog barked somewhere behind a wooden fence and then stopped. The Joshua trees along the roadside stood in the early light like patient, eccentric sentinels exactly as I remembered them. I had forgotten how much I missed this. Not the house specifically, not the memories specifically, but this, the scale of it. The way the sky out here was actually the sky, not a thin strip of blue between buildings. The way you could see the San Gabriel Mountains to the south, snow on the high peaks, even in November, and the Tehachapas to the west, and nothing between you and any of it but open ground. I walked for about 20 minutes before I reached the main commercial strip on Lancaster Boulevard. Most of the storefronts were still closed at that hour, their window displays dim behind glass. But one was open, had been open, judging by the smell of fresh coffee drifting out through the propped front door for quite some time. Haynes General Store had been on that corner for as long as I could remember. It was the kind of place that existed in almost every small California town of a certain age, part grocery, part hardware, part post office annex, part community bulletin board. The sign above the door was the same hand-painted wood sign I remembered from 30 years ago. The paint faded, but the letters still perfectly legible. A woman was restocking a shelf near the front window when I pushed the door open. She was about 68, solidly built with silver hair pulled back in a practical bun and reading glasses pushed up on her forehead. She was wearing a flannel shirt the color of pine needles and moving cans of soup with the brisk efficiency of someone who had performed this exact task approximately 10,000 times. She turned at the sound of the bell above the door. For a moment, she just looked at me. Then her face did something extraordinary. It crumpled and brightened at the same time the way faces do when they see someone they had half convinced themselves they might never see again. "Arthur Pendleton," she said. Her voice came out thick. "Oh, Arthur." She crossed the store in about 4 steps and wrapped both arms around me before I had fully processed that she was moving, and she hugged me the way women of her generation hug fully, without self-consciousness, with her chin on my shoulder, and her arms locked tight across my back. I felt her take one shaky breath against my collar. "Dorothy," I managed. "Don't you say a word yet." She said, her voice muffled against my shoulder. "Just let me do this for one more second." She held on for another moment, then stepped back and grabbed both my arms just below the shoulder and looked at my face with the frank, assessing gaze of someone who had known me when I was young enough to be assessed. Her eyes were bright and wet behind the reading glasses she had pushed back down onto her nose. "You look terrible," she announced. "I feel terrible," I said honestly. "Well?" She released my arms and turned toward the back counter with the decisive air of a woman who solves problems by making coffee. "That's fixable. Sit down, Arthur. I have a fresh pot, and I have questions, and you are not leaving this store until I get both into you." She poured 2 mugs without asking how I took mine, she already knew. Which told me Mary had talked about me here more than I had realized, and set them on the counter, and pulled up a stool on her side, and looked at me expectantly. "When did you get in?" she asked. "Last night. Late. Thomas called me this morning." She wrapped both hands around her mug. "He didn't say much, just said you were back, and that you needed a few days before anyone made a fuss." She tilted her head. "I am not making a fuss. I am making coffee. There is a difference. Despite everything. Despite the blue notebook still sitting on my kitchen table, and the legal folder I had not yet opened, and the 15 years of grief that had rearranged themselves in my chest overnight into something new and heavier and more complicated, I almost smiled. Mary used to say the same thing. Dorothy's expression softened in a way that told me exactly how much she had loved my wife. She used to come in every Tuesday, she said. For her coffee and her gossip, she called it, though she never gossiped about anyone who didn't deserve it. A pause. I missed her every Tuesday for about 3 years after she passed. Then I started missing her differently, the way you miss furniture that used to be in a room. You stop expecting to see it, but the room still looks wrong without it. My throat tightened. That's exactly right, I said. How are the kids? She asked with a careful neutrality that told me she already suspected the answer. I wrapped both hands around my coffee mug. The ceramic was warm and solid. They're fine, I said. They're in Los Angeles. Dorothy looked at me for a long moment, over the rim of her mug. She did not push. That was the thing about people who had lived in small towns their whole lives. They understood that some information arrived in its own time, and that pushing only delayed it. Thomas has kept that house of yours like it was occupied, she said instead. I used to walk past on my evening route and see him out there fixing the porch rail, pulling weeds along Mary's lavender beds, checking the windows before a storm. She shook her head slowly. I always thought that was the most faithful thing I had ever seen a neighbor do. Now I'm starting to wonder if faithful is even the right word for it. It isn't, I said, but I don't have the right word yet. She refilled my mug without being asked. By the time I walked back down Lancaster Boulevard toward Miller Creek Road, 3 other people had stopped me. A man named Gerald, who had worked at the same Caltrans district office as me in the 90s. A woman named Patricia, whose daughter had been in the same youth soccer league as Julian, back when Julian was a boy who played soccer and came home muddy and laughed at dinner. A retired couple whose names I could not immediately recall, but whose faces I recognized from 30 years of 4th of July gatherings in the park 2 blocks from the house. Every one of them shook my hand, or hugged me, or put a hand on my arm. Every one of them said some version of the same thing, that it was good to see me, that they had thought about me over the years, that they hoped I was staying for a while. Not one of them asked me why I had come back. Not one of them made me feel like my return required explanation. I walked back up the gravel drive to the house with my hands in my pockets, and the morning sun warm on my face, and something unfamiliar pressing against the inside of my ribs. It took me a few steps to identify it. It was the specific relief of being somewhere you are simply known. Thomas was sitting on the porch steps with 2 paper bags from a breakfast place on the boulevard. A cup holder with 2 more coffees balanced beside him. He looked up when I came up the walk and held up one of the bags. Egg and cheese on sourdough, he said. Place opened up about 2 years ago. Mary would have approved. I sat down beside him on the steps and took the bag. The morning light was hitting the desert floor at a low angle, turning everything gold and amber. Somewhere down the road, a mockingbird was working through its full repertoire at considerable volume. Thomas? I said between bites. The legal folder. The one from Samuel Vance. Yes. I need to read it today. He nodded, chewing thoughtfully. I figured you'd say that. He looked out at the road. There's a lot in there, Arthur. I want you to know that before you open it. Mary was thorough. She was always thorough. I thought about the blue notebook, about the brake fluid and the margins of the legal pad, and the 15 years of careful planning that had waited in a metal box for exactly this moment. I know she was, I said. That's what terrifies me and saves me at the same time. Thomas picked up his coffee. Down the road, the mockingbird changed its song entirely and started over from the beginning. Ready when you are, Thomas said. Thomas cleared the breakfast dishes while I spread the contents of the legal folder across the kitchen table. The documents were organized the way Mary organized everything chronologically, with a handwritten index card, paper-clipped to the front of each section. Her initials appeared in the bottom right corner of every index card. I recognized the habit immediately. She had indexed our tax returns the same way for 22 years of marriage. The folder contained 4 sections: financial records, a property assessment from Kern County, a 12-page legal document with the heading Conditional Spendthrift Trust, Pendleton Family Estate, and a single sealed envelope at the very back with my name written on the front in Mary's handwriting, and the instruction, "Do not open until you have read everything else written beneath it." I started with the trust document. The language was dense in the way that legal documents are always dense, but I was an engineer by training, and I had spent 30 years reading technical specifications that could kill people if misunderstood. I read slowly and carefully, and by the 3rd page I had to set it down and press both hands against my face because my heart was hammering so hard I could feel it in my ears. "Thomas," I said, my voice coming out muffled behind my hands, "did you know the full extent of this?" He set a glass of water in front of me and pulled out the chair across the table. "I knew the broad strokes," he said carefully. "Mary explained the concept to me in 2009. She didn't show me the actual documents. She said the less I knew about the specific figures, the more natural I could behave if anyone ever asked me questions." I lowered my hands and looked at him. "She thought of everything. She thought of everything," he agreed without a trace of exaggeration. The trust had been established in August of 2009 by Samuel Vance, attorney at law, using $5 million drawn from a portfolio of engineering patents Arthur Pendleton had filed between 1988 and 2003. I had known about those patents in the abstract way that you know about retirement accounts, aware they exist, not particularly interested in their current value. Mary had managed our finances with complete competence and complete transparency, and I had trusted her completely, which meant I had never looked closely at anything she told me was handled. She had been handling it all right. The trust was structured as a conditional spendthrift trust under California probate code. The beneficiaries were listed as Julian Pendleton and Chloe Pendleton Webb. The assets within the trust had been used over the years between 2009 and 2010 to fund various property purchases and investment accounts that Julian and Chloe currently believed were entirely their own. The trust document made clear in language that grew more precise with every paragraph that this was not the case. And then I reached Section 7. The heading read, Condition of Forfeiture and Asset Recovery. I read it twice. Then I read it a 3rd time out loud slowly, because I needed to hear the words in the air to fully believe them. In the event that either or both named beneficiaries shall abandon, neglect, evict, or otherwise cause the removal of Arthur James Pendleton from his primary place of legal residence, or shall fail to provide reasonable care and support during a documented medical crisis, the successor trustee is authorized and directed to immediately freeze all trust-originated assets currently held in the names of said beneficiaries and transfer beneficial interest to the Arthur J. Pendleton Medical and Living Trust, to be administered at the successor trustee's discretion. The kitchen was very quiet. "She set a trap," I said. My voice came out somewhere between a whisper and a laugh. "She built them a trap out of their own greed, and she spent 15 years waiting for them to walk into it." "She preferred the word preparation," Thomas said, and the corner of his mouth moved in a way that told me he was quoting her directly. I picked up the glass of water and drank half of it in one go because my throat had gone completely dry. "Who is the successor trustee?" "Samuel Vance Jr., Thomas said. "Sam Sr. passed about 4 years ago. Jr. took over the practice and the file. Mary specified the succession in the original document." "Has he been notified?" "He was notified the morning after you arrived here," Thomas said. He folded his hands on the table with the calm of a man delivering information he has been rehearsing for a long time. "I called him. He confirmed that the triggering conditions had been met. You had been removed from your primary residence by the named beneficiaries during a documented medical crisis. He froze the assets within 48 hours. I put the glass down. The sound it made against the table was very loud in the quiet kitchen. Their accounts, I said. Their bank accounts, their properties. All of it, Thomas said. Everything that was purchased or funded using trust assets, which as it turns out is most of what they own. He paused. Julian's Beverly Hills property. Chloe and Marcus's condominium in Santa Monica. 3 investment accounts. A commercial property in Culver City that Marcus uses as a business address. The number moved through me slowly, the way cold water moves through a pipe. I thought about Julian standing at his front door with my suitcases. I thought about Marcus pressing $300 into my shirt pocket with 2 fingers. I thought about Chloe's white knuckles on her own elbows. They don't know yet, I said. They will, Thomas said. Probably within the next day or 2 when the transfers start showing up as frozen. He looked at me steadily. And when they figure out what happened, Arthur, they are going to come here. I nodded slowly. I had already worked that part out. I reached for my phone and dialed the number printed on the front of the legal folder. It rang twice. Vance Law Office, this is Samuel. The voice was younger than I expected, brisk-focused, the voice of a man in the middle of several things at once. This is Arthur Pendleton, I said. A brief pause. Then with a shift in tone that told me he had been waiting for this call. Mr. Pendleton, I'm very glad you called. I've been hoping to speak with you directly. Thomas tells me the assets have been frozen, I said. As of yesterday morning, yes, sir. The conditions specified in Section 7 of your wife's trust were met when your son and daughter removed you from the Beverly Hills property on November 12th. His voice was careful and precise. I want to be clear that I took no pleasure in executing that provision. But I also want you to know that your wife was extraordinarily thorough in her preparation. This trust is airtight, Mr. Pendleton. I've reviewed it more times than I can count since I inherited my father's practice, and I have never found a single exploitable gap. She registered it in Kern County, I said, specifically to prevent a search of LA County records from turning it up, Vance confirmed. She thought of that detail herself. My father told me she came to their first meeting with a list of 17 potential vulnerabilities in the original draft, and asked him to address every one of them before she signed. Another pause. He told me it was the most rigorous client preparation he had ever encountered in 40 years of practice. Something swelled in my chest that was not quite grief and not quite pride, but lived somewhere in the neighborhood of both. I pressed my free hand flat against the table to keep it from shaking. Mr. Vance, I said, what happens next? We wait, he said simply. The ball is in their court now, Mr. Pendleton. They have 2 options. They can accept the forfeiture, in which case the assets transfer cleanly and the matter is resolved. Or, he let the words sit for a moment, they can choose to fight it, in which case I would strongly encourage you to come to my office in Winchester at your earliest convenience, because there is considerably more in your wife's file than what you've read so far. I looked at the sealed envelope at the back of the folder. My name in Mary's handwriting. I'll be there, I said. But first I need to finish reading what she left me here. Of course, Vance said. Take your time, Mr. Pendleton. Your wife spent 15 years making sure you had it. A brief pause. She was, if I may say so, a remarkable woman. Yes, I said, she was. I ended the call and sat for a moment with the phone in my hand. Then I reached for the sealed envelope, turned it over, and carefully worked the flap open. Inside was a single note card. 4 sentences in Mary's handwriting. Arthur. The documents will explain the mechanics. But I want you to know the reason. I did not build this because I was angry. I built this because I loved you, and some things deserve to be protected. I read it 4 times. Then I folded it carefully and put it in my shirt pocket against my chest, where it stayed for the rest of the day. My phone rang 40 minutes later. The number on the screen was Julian's. I looked at it for a long moment, my jaw tight, my thumb hovering. Then I answered. "Julian," I said. "Dad." His voice was different from the last time I had heard it, tighter, higher, with an edge of something that took me a second to identify. It was panic. "We need to talk. Something has happened with our accounts, and I think there might be some kind of mistake." I looked out the kitchen window at the desert afternoon, gold and still and enormous. "There's no mistake," I said quietly. "Come to Lancaster, Julian. We'll talk." They arrived on a Friday afternoon, 3 days after Julian's phone call. I heard the car before I saw it. The particular low growl of a German engine working harder than it needed to on a gravel road. The kind of sound that belongs on a freeway and knows it. I was sitting on the front porch with a cup of coffee and a Kern County property map Thomas had pulled from the county assessor's website, tracing the boundary lines of the Lancaster parcel with my index finger when the black BMW came around the bend in Miller Creek Road and turned into the driveway too fast, throwing gravel against the fence posts. Thomas was around the side of the house replacing a section of weathered siding. I heard his hammer stop. Julian got out first. He was wearing dark jeans and a gray cashmere sweater and leather shoes that were going to be ruined by the gravel before he made it to the porch steps, and he moved toward me, with his arms slightly open and his face arranged into an expression of such practiced remorse that it would have been convincing to anyone who had not spent 40 years learning to read the specific geometry of his face when he was not telling the truth. Chloe came around from the passenger side carrying flowers. Lavender. The exact variety Mary had planted along the front walk, the same silver-gray bundles that brushed against your legs when you came up the path. She had tied them with a piece of twine, and she held them against her chest with both hands. And when she saw me, she started crying before she had taken 3 steps. "Daddy," she said, her voice breaking wide open. Real tears I could see from where I sat, that they were real, running fast down both cheeks, her chin trembling. Whatever else Chloe was, she had genuinely felt something driving up here. Whether that something was guilt or fear or grief or some complicated mixture of all 3, I could not yet say. Julian reached the bottom of the porch steps and stopped. He looked up at me with his hands in his front pockets and his jaw working the way it did when he was composing sentences in his head before saying them out loud. "Dad," he said, "I know there's nothing I can say that—" "Come up and sit down," I said. My voice came out even and quiet the way I had trained it to sound on job sites when something had gone wrong, and I needed the crew to stay calm while I assessed the damage. "Both of you, there's coffee inside." Chloe came up the steps and tried to hug me. I let her. She wrapped her arms around my neck and sobbed against my collar, a full, shaking, helpless sob that vibrated through her whole frame, and I put one hand on her back and waited for it to pass. Over her shoulder, I watched Julian climb the steps. He was looking at the front door of the house, not at his sister, not at me. His eyes moved across the doorframe and the front windows with the quick cataloging focus of a man taking inventory. I filed that away. We sat in the living room. I poured coffee. Julian held his mug in both hands and looked at the floor between his feet. Chloe sat beside him on the couch, with the lavender in her lap, still sniffling, pressing the back of her wrist against her eyes every few minutes. The afternoon light came in low through the west windows, the way it does in the desert in November, turning everything amber and long-shadowed. "I don't understand what happened," Julian said finally. His voice had recovered its steadiness, which told me the window of genuine emotion, whatever there had been of it, had closed. "Our accounts, our properties, Everything just locked up overnight. Marcus talked to 3 different bank managers, and none of them could explain it clearly. They kept referencing some kind of trust instrument we've never heard of. It's called a conditional spendthrift trust, I said pleasantly. Your mother established it in 2009. Julian's head came up fast. Chloe went very still. Mom. Chloe's voice was barely above a whisper. Mom set this up. She did. I sipped my coffee. She was thorough. Julian's eyes narrowed almost imperceptibly. He was doing math behind his face. I could see it the same way I could see structural calculation happening in a load-bearing column, invisible but unmistakable to anyone who knew what to look for. So there's a document, he said carefully. A legal document that triggered this. Several documents, I said. And they're here? He glanced toward the hallway, toward the direction of the back rooms, with the casual, redirected gaze of a man trying not to look like he is looking for something specific. Julian. I set my mug down on the side table and looked at my son directly, waiting until he met my eyes. I'm not going to talk about documents tonight. I'd like to hear how you've both been. I'd like to know how Chloe is doing. Marcus practice, I'd like to hear about your lives. I paused. We haven't talked about your lives in a long time. Julian's jaw tightened. Then he smiled a smooth, recovered smile that reached his eyes just enough. Of course, he said. Of course you're right. Chloe launched into it, with the desperate energy of someone grateful for any direction to move in. She talked about their neighborhood in Santa Monica, about a ceramic class she had started taking, about a rescue dog named Chester that Marcus refused to acknowledge, but secretly fed treats to under the kitchen table. She talked, and the words were warm and normal, and I listened and nodded and watched Julian. He could not stop looking at the hallway. Every few minutes between sentences of Chloe's, his gaze drifted. Past the fireplace, past the bookshelf, toward the back of the house where the study was, where the file cabinet stood in the corner. His fingers tapped once against his mug, stopped, tapped again. His right knee bounced twice and then stilled deliberately when he noticed me noticing it. At 6 o'clock, I said they were welcome to stay the night. The guest room was made up. Thomas kept it aired out, and Julian accepted before I finished the sentence. Chloe hugged me again hard and said, "Thank you, Daddy," and her voice cracked on the second word in a way that made me think she actually meant it, at least in that moment. I showed them to the guest room. I said goodnight. I walked to my own room at the end of the hall, changed into pajamas, turned off the bedside lamp, and lay down in the dark, with my hands folded on my chest. I did not close my eyes. I had already called Thomas before they arrived. He knew what to do. The recording system behind the fireplace wall had been running since 4 that afternoon. Every room in the main part of the house, the living room, the study, the hallway covered by the cameras Mary had asked him to install 15 years ago. The lenses no larger than the head of a finishing nail set into the wood grain, where no one who was not looking for them would ever find them. I lay in the dark and listened to the house. At 9:47, the floorboards in the hallway creaked. I heard Chloe's voice barely audible, her tone urgent and compressed the way voices get when people are trying to be quiet and failing. "Julian, I don't think we should—" "Keep your voice down," Julian said, "and stay by the door." More footsteps, the sound of the study door opening on its hinges, the soft scrape of a file cabinet drawer being pulled. I lay still. My jaw was clenched so tightly that my back teeth ached. The heat that moved through my chest was not grief this time, and it was not sadness. It was something harder and colder than either of those things. The kind of cold that lives at the center of controlled fury. The kind an engineer feels when he looks at a bridge and sees exactly where and why and how it is going to fail. I had built that bridge. I knew every bolt in it. I let them look. At 11:15, the house went quiet again. At 11:30, I heard the guest room door close softly. At midnight, I finally got up, walked quietly to the kitchen, and stood at the window in the dark with a glass of water and watched the desert under the stars. Then, I picked up my phone and called Thomas. "They went into the study," I said quietly. "Got it all," Thomas said. His voice was steady and satisfied in the way of a man who has just watched a plan work exactly as it was supposed to. Crystal clear, both of them. Ray Castillo is going to have a very easy job. I exhaled slowly. Outside, the desert was vast and cold and absolutely still. "Good," I said. "Let them sleep. And Thomas, thank you." "Don't thank me," he said. "Thank Mary. This was her camera." I made breakfast for all three of us the next morning, like nothing had happened. Eggs scrambled with sharp cheddar sourdough toast coffee, from the same grounds Thomas kept stocked in the pantry. I moved around the kitchen with the deliberate calm of a man who had slept well, which was not true, but which was the version of events I intended to present. When Julian and Chloe came out of the guest room at 8:30, looking tired in the particular guilty way of people who have been up past midnight, doing something they cannot mention, I handed them each a plate and told them to sit down. "You didn't have to do this, Dad," Chloe said. Her voice was still rough at the edges. She had dark circles under both eyes, and her hair was pulled back in a way that suggested she hadn't looked in a mirror yet. She sat down and wrapped both hands around her coffee mug like it was the only warm thing in the world, and took a long, grateful sip. "I've been making breakfast since before either of you was born," I said pleasantly. "Sit. Eat." Julian sat. He picked up his fork and moved his eggs around his plate without actually eating them. His eyes kept finding the hallway. After breakfast, I suggested a walk through the house. "I haven't been here in 15 years, I said, which was true. "I'd like to see it properly in the daylight. Come with me." Chloe brightened at that genuinely, I thought. She had always loved this house. As a teenager, she used to beg to spend summers here away from Los Angeles, away from the social machinery of her Beverly Hills middle school. Julian came along with the expression of a man accepting a meeting he cannot get out of. I walked them through each room slowly. The living room first. I pointed out the fireplace Mary had insisted on, even though Lancaster summers made it impractical 9 months out of 12. She said a house without a fireplace isn't a home, I said. I told her we lived in the desert. She said that was exactly why we needed one. I ran my hand along the brick mantel. Behind that wall, 12 inches back, the recording server hummed quietly in its housing. I kept my hand perfectly steady. Julian watched my hand on the mantel. His jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "She had good taste," he said. His voice was light and careful, the vocal equivalent of a man walking across ice and testing each step. "She had excellent taste," I agreed. Down the hallway. I pointed out the framed photographs Mary had hung in a single straight line our wedding, a camping trip in the Sierras. From 1991, Julian at his college graduation. Chloe on her first day of high school. Julian stopped in front of his graduation photo and stared at it with an expression I could not immediately parse. Something moved behind his eyes, quick and complicated, and gone before I could name it. "You look happy there," I said. "I was," he said, and for just that 1 second I believed him completely. We reached the study. I opened the door and stepped inside. The file cabinet stood in the corner exactly where it always had 4 drawers, tall dark green metal, the handle on the second drawer slightly bent where I had caught it, with a moving dolly in 2001. Julian's gaze went to it immediately. He pulled it back to my face in under a second, but under a second was not fast enough. "This is where you did your drafting," Chloe said, touching the edge of the old drafting table along the wall. Her voice had gone soft and careful, in the way of someone handling something fragile. I used to sit under this table and draw while you worked. You never told me to leave. My throat tightened without warning. I know, I said. I liked the company. Her eyes filled. She pressed her fingers against her mouth and looked away toward the window. Julian cleared his throat. Dad, he said. About the trust document, the one Mom apparently set up. Is there any chance the paperwork is somewhere in here? I'd really like to understand what we're dealing with legally, and if we could just… Julian. I turned to look at my son fully. He stopped talking. I'll have the attorney contact you directly. That's the appropriate channel. I held his gaze. That's how your mother wanted it handled. His face went very controlled. Right, he said. Of course. We walked back to the living room. I offered more coffee. Chloe accepted. Julian said he needed to make some calls and stepped onto the front porch, pulling the door shut behind him. Through the window, I watched him pace the length of the porch, twice, phone pressed to his ear, one hand raking through his hair. He was talking fast. I could not hear the words, but I did not need to. I knew who he was calling. I knew what he was asking. Chloe stood beside me with her coffee mug. She was watching her brother through the glass, too, and the expression on her face, tired, ashamed, frightened, told me that whatever Julian was planning next, part of her already knew she did not want to be any part of it. She just didn't know how to say so. Chloe, I said quietly. She turned to look at me. It's not too late, I said, to make a different choice. Her chin trembled. She opened her mouth closed. It looked back out the window at her brother. Then she walked to the kitchen and set her mug in the sink and did not answer me at all. That evening after they left, I stood in the study doorway and looked at the file cabinet and the drafting table and the camera lens the size of a nailhead set into the wood grain 6 inches above the doorframe. Got everything you needed? I asked the empty room. The house, of course, did not answer. But Mary had built it to hold its secrets well. Before I tell you what happened next, comment, the number 6 right now, so I know you are still with me. Because what Julian and Chloe did when they came back to that house, I never saw it coming. And I do not think you will either. A gentle reminder, this story contains some fictional elements woven in for depth and reflection. If that is not the kind of story, you are here for no hard feelings. But if you are staying, I promise it is worth it. It happened again at 2:17 in the morning. I was not asleep. I had not been asleep. I lay on my back in the dark with my hands folded on my chest and my eyes open and my ears doing the work. My eyes could not cataloging every sound. The house made the way I used to catalog stress readings on a new bridge methodically, without judgment, waiting for the number that did not belong. The number came at 2:17, a floorboard in the hallway. Then the soft compression of the study door handle being depressed slowly by someone trying very hard not to make noise. Then, after a pause, the metallic whisper of a file cabinet drawer sliding open on its tracks. My jaw clenched so hard my back teeth ached. I breathed through my nose 4 counts and 4 counts out the way I had learned to manage anger on job sites when a contractor had done something dangerous, and I needed to stay functional long enough to fix it before I addressed the cause. I stayed in bed. I let them look. There was nothing in that file cabinet that could help them. The trust documents were locked in Thomas's house next door. The original notebooks were in the metal box under my bed, 18 inches from where I was lying. Let them look all night. The cameras were already doing the only work that mattered. At 3:45, the house went quiet again. At 7 the next morning, I made coffee, said goodbye to Julian and Chloe at the front door, with the same pleasant expression I had maintained for 2 days, watched the BMW back down the gravel drive, and disappear around the bend in Miller Creek Road, and then walked directly to Thomas's back door and knocked twice. He opened it before the second knock landed. He was already dressed. "Recording room," he said. "Come on." The space behind the fireplace wall was accessed through a panel in the utility closet, a narrow room barely 4 feet deep that Mary had specified in the original construction drawings as a mechanical chase. Thomas had converted it years ago into a clean, dry housing for the recording equipment, a compact server unit, a monitor, 2 external drives for redundant backup, all of it running on a dedicated circuit. The monitor showed a quad-split view of the 4 main cameras, living room hallway, study front entry. Thomas pulled up the previous night's footage on the study camera and hit play. The timestamp read 2:17 a.m. The study door opened. Julian came in first, moving in a low crouch that would have been almost comical if it were not so deliberate. Chloe followed, staying near the door the way Julian had instructed her. Her arms wrapped around herself, her face twisted with an expression that was equal parts determination and misery. Julian went straight to the file cabinet. He pulled the second drawer, the one with the bent handle, and went through it fast and efficiently, the way a man goes through files he has been thinking about for days. Folder by folder, checking labels, replacing each one with the careful precision of someone who does not want the search to be detected. Chloe stood at the door and watched him with her hands pressed flat against her own sternum, her lips moving in what might have been a prayer, or might have been her telling herself to hurry up. They spent 22 minutes in that room. They found nothing useful. Julian's face, when he finally straightened up and pushed the drawer shut, was tight with frustration, lips pressed flat, nostrils flared, the look of a man recalculating. Thomas paused the footage. "Clear as daylight," he said. My chest felt hollow in a way that had nothing to do with satisfaction. I had known what they were going to do. I had let them do it. I had built the conditions for exactly this outcome. And yet watching my son move through my wife's house in the middle of the night, looking for documents to destroy, produced a cold, leaden weight in my stomach that no amount of preparation could have fully prevented. "Save everything," I said. "Both drives." "Already done," Thomas said. "I called Ray last night when the motion sensors tripped. He's on his way from Bakersfield right now." Ray Castillo arrived at 10:30 in a gray pickup truck with a cracked windshield and a calm, unhurried manner that immediately made me trust him. He was 55, broad through the shoulders, with close-cropped gray hair and the specific stillness of a man who had spent years in situations where moving too fast got people hurt. He had been a detective with the LAPD for 22 years before going private, and Samuel Vance Jr. had been using him for investigative work for the past 6. He shook my hand once, firm and brief, and got straight to it. "Mr. Pendleton," he said, setting his laptop on the kitchen table and opening it. "I've been reviewing the financial records Samuel sent me. There's something you need to see before we talk about the footage." He turned the screen toward me. It was a bank transfer record. The sending account belonged to Marcus Webb. The receiving account belonged to a medical practice in Los Angeles. The transfer date was 6 months before I had received my cancer diagnosis. The amount was $40,000. I stared at it. The number sat on the screen, clean and specific, and completely damning, and something shifted in the architecture of everything I thought I understood about the past year of my life. "Is that what I think it is?" I asked. Ray looked at me steadily. "We're still confirming," he said. "But yes, Mr. Pendleton, I think it probably is." 3 days after Ray Castillo drove back to Bakersfield with 2 backup drives and a folder of bank records, I found myself standing in front of Hanes General Store at 8 in the morning, with no particular plan except that I could not spend another hour inside my own head. The bell above the door announced me. Dorothy looked up from behind the counter where she was sorting mail into the post office annex boxes along the back wall And her face did the thing it always did. When she saw me now, a quick, warm brightening, like a lamp turning on. "Coffee's fresh," she said. "Sit down, Arthur. You look like a man who needs to talk and doesn't know how to start." "Is it that obvious?" I said, settling onto the stool at the counter. "You have the same face my husband used to get when the tractor broke down and he hadn't told me yet." She set a mug in front of me and leaned both forearms on the counter. "So, what broke?" I wrapped both hands around the mug. The ceramic was warm and solid, the coffee strong enough to strip paint. I looked at Dorothy, at her steady gray eyes and her no-nonsense flannel shirt, and the reading glasses pushed up on her forehead, and decided that 15 years was long enough to carry something alone. "Dorothy," I said, "when Julian came here in 2009, what exactly did he ask you?" The warmth in her face shifted into something more careful. She straightened up, slowly, folded her arms across her chest, and looked at me for a long moment, with an expression I could not read. "How did you know about that?" she asked. "Mary's journals?" I said. Something moved across Dorothy's face, relief, I thought, mixed with a grief that had clearly been sitting behind her eyes for a very long time. She unfolded her arms, reached under the counter, and came up with a ceramic mug of her own. She poured herself coffee and came around to sit on the stool beside me, which told me this was going to take more than a minute. "It was February," she said, 2009, a Tuesday, because I remember thinking it was strange Tuesdays were when your wife came in, not Julian. He walked in around 10 in the morning wearing a jacket that cost more than my monthly rent and smiling like he owned the place. Her jaw tightened at the memory. He said he was in the area on business, said he wanted to catch up. But he didn't want to catch up, I said. He wanted information. Dorothy's voice went flat and precise. He asked about property values on Miller Creek Road, asked how much land your parcel ran to, asked whether I knew if you'd ever had any oil company people come out to look at the back acreage. She picked up her mug and held it without drinking. Then he asked about your retirement, whether you'd mentioned your pension to anyone, whether Mary had ever talked about investments. My chest tightened so sharply I had to set my mug down. He never once asked how you were doing, Dorothy said. Not once in 45 minutes. Not how your health was, not how work was going, not whether you and Mary were happy. Her voice cracked on the last word, and she pressed her lips together hard until it steadied. I wrote down what he asked. Date and time right there in my order book. Then I called Mary that same afternoon. What did she say? My voice came out rough and low. Dorothy looked at her coffee. She went quiet for a long time, long enough that I thought the line had dropped. Then she said, Dorothy stopped, cleared her throat, started again. She said, Dorothy, thank you. Please don't tell Arthur. He's got enough to carry. Dorothy looked up at me. Her eyes were bright and wet. I asked her if she was all right. She said she was fine. She said she just needed to think. I stared at the counter surface. The wood grain blurred and refocused. She wasn't fine, I said. No, Dorothy said softly. She was figuring out how to save your life. But she didn't say that part. We sat with that for a moment. Outside on Lancaster Boulevard, a truck rumbled past. The bell above the door chimed as someone came in for stamps, saw us, and quietly went to the annex boxes without disturbing us. Why didn't you tell me? I asked. After she died. Why didn't you say something? Dorothy's chin trembled. She pressed one hand flat against the counter and breathed through it. Because she asked me not to, she said. And because Mary Pendleton never asked me for anything without a reason. So I kept it. She looked at me directly. I kept it 15 years, Arthur, and every single Tuesday when I made that first pot of coffee, I thought about telling you, and I didn't. Her voice broke completely open. I am so sorry. I am so deeply sorry. I reached over and covered her hand with mine. You did what she asked, I said. That's not something to apologize for. Dorothy pulled in a long, shaky breath, nodded once hard the way people nod when they are trying to hold themselves together through sheer force of will. I picked up my coffee mug and finished what was left of it. Then I set it down, stood up, and reached for my jacket. Dorothy, I said, did you keep that order book? She looked up at me. Then she reached under the counter again and produced a worn spiral notebook, its cover soft with age. She held it out to me. Page 47, she said. I underlined his questions. I took it carefully, the way you take something that has been kept a long time. Outside, I sat in my truck and called Vance Jr. Samuel, I said when he picked up, how far back does your father's file on Julian go? The drive from Lancaster to Pasadena takes about 90 minutes on a clear day, longer when the traffic backs up at the interchange near Palmdale. I had the windows down, despite the December cold, because I needed the air moving. The San Gabriel Mountains came into view around the 40-minute mark, their upper ridges white with early snow, and I drove with one hand on the wheel and the other resting on the doorframe and thought about my mother. Carol Pendleton was 88 years old and had been living at Arroyo Gardens Care Center in Pasadena for the past 4 years. She had good days and difficult days the way people her age do, but her mind was still fundamentally her own, sharp in the mornings, slower in the afternoons, with the occasional gap in recent memory that she herself acknowledged with a brisk practicality that I found both admirable and heartbreaking. She had never been a woman who indulged confusion. Even now, she fought it the way she had fought everything in her life, directly, without complaint, without asking anyone to feel sorry about it. I had not seen her since September. That was too long, and I knew it. The care center smelled of pine cleaner and cafeteria food, and something floral from the arrangement of silk flowers in the lobby that had been there, as far as I could tell, since the Nixon administration. A young aide named Brenda walked me back to my mother's room and knocked twice before opening the door. Carol was sitting in the chair by the window in a blue cardigan and her good slippers, reading a large-print Reader's Digest with the focused intensity of a woman determined to finish her paragraph before allowing any interruptions. She held up one finger without looking up. I stood in the doorway and waited. After 30 seconds, she placed the magazine face down on her knee, looked up, and her whole face changed. Arthur! Her voice came out fierce and warm and cracked through the middle all at once. Arthur, come here right now. I crossed the room in 4 steps and bent down, and she grabbed both my arms with hands that were smaller than I remembered, but stronger than you would expect, and she pulled me into a hug that lasted a long time. I could feel her ribs through the cardigan. I could feel her breathing against my shoulder. Careful, deliberate breaths, the kind a person takes when they are trying not to cry and mostly succeeding. You look thin, she said into my collar. I'm fine, Mom. You look thin and tired and like something has happened. She pulled back and held my face in both hands and looked at me with eyes that were clouded at the edges now, but still at their center, the same sharp hazel they had always been. Sit down and tell me. I pulled the visitor's chair close to hers and sat. I told her the short version: Beverly Hills, the taxi Lancaster, the house. I left out the journals and the trust and the footage. Those were not things I was ready to say out loud to my mother. She listened without interrupting, which was unusual for her. Her hands rested in her lap, and she watched my face the whole time with an expression that cycled slowly through things I could not fully name. When I finished, she was quiet for a moment. Then she reached out and put her hand over mine on the arm of the chair. Arthur, she said, I need to tell you something. I should have told you a long time ago, but Mary asked me not to, and I gave her my word, and your mother keeps her word even when it costs her something." She stopped, drew a careful breath. "Mary came to see me in 2009. My whole body went still. "She came alone," Carol continued. "Didn't call ahead, just appeared at my apartment. I was still in the apartment in Marengo then before the fall. She brought a lemon cake from that bakery on Colorado Boulevard that I liked." A small, sad smile crossed her face. "She sat with me for 2 hours. We talked about ordinary things, mostly. The garden, a book I had been reading, whether you were working too hard." The smile faded. Then right before she left, she took my hand, and she said— Carol's voice faltered. She pressed her lips together hard. She said, "Carol, I need you to know that Arthur is going to be all right. No matter what happens in the coming years, he is going to be all right. I have made sure of it. Please don't worry about him." The room was very quiet. Outside the window, a pair of sparrows were working over something on the window ledge, their small movements quick and purposeful. "I didn't understand what she meant," Carol said. Her voice was unsteady now, moving carefully around the edges of something that hurt. I thought perhaps she was ill and hadn't told us yet. I asked her directly. She said no, she was fine. She kissed me on the cheek and she left." Carol's chin trembled visibly. "3 months later, she was gone. And I have been sitting with those words for 15 years, Arthur. Every single day. Wondering what she knew that I didn't. Wondering if I should have pushed harder." Her voice broke completely. Wondering if she was saying goodbye. Something collapsed in the center of my chest. Not dramatically, not with any of the force of the moment in the Lancaster kitchen when I had first read the journals. This was quieter than that, and somehow worse. The slow, settling weight of understanding something you cannot unknow. She had come to say goodbye to my mother. She had brought a lemon cake and sat for 2 hours talking about gardens and books, and whether I was working too hard, and the whole time she had already made her decision and was tying up the loose ends of her life with the same methodical care she brought to everything. She had made sure my mother would not spend 15 years worrying about me. I pressed my free hand against my eyes, hard. The pressure helped. "She was saying goodbye," I said. My voice came out low and cracked. "And she was keeping a promise she had already made to me without telling me she'd made it." Carol gripped my hand tighter. Her knuckles were white. "She loved you in a way I have only seen once or twice in my entire life," she said fiercely. "Do you understand me? Once or twice? In 88 years. I could not speak for a moment. I sat with my hand pressed over my eyes and my mother's hand holding mine, and the sparrows working at the window ledge, and the distant sound of the care center hallway going about its ordinary afternoon. Then my phone buzzed against my thigh. A text from Ray Castillo. "Arthur, found the recording. Drive back tonight. You need to hear this." I drove back from Pasadena with the windows up this time. The December dark had settled over the Antelope Valley by the time I turned onto Miller Creek Road, and the temperature had dropped into the low 40s. My headlights swept across the gravel and the Joshua trees, and the front of the house where Thomas's kitchen window was lit amber, and Ray Castillo's gray pickup was parked behind my truck exactly where he had left it 2 days ago, as though he had never moved. He was sitting on the porch steps with a thermos of coffee and his laptop open on his knees. He looked up when I came up the walk. "How's your mother?" he asked. "She's all right," I said. "What did you find?" He turned the laptop to face me without a preamble. Ray was that kind of man. He understood that there were moments when small talk was not a kindness, but a delay, and he had too much respect for the people he worked for to waste their time. The screen showed a digital audio file. The file name was a string of numbers, a timestamp. March 9th, 2010. 6 days before Mary died. Your wife mailed a package to Samuel Vance Sr. on March 8th, Ray said. Overnight delivery. Inside was a compact SD card pulled from the dash cam mounted on her dashboard, the kind of system that records both video and cabin audio continuously whenever the engine runs. Mary had installed it herself about 6 months before she died. The unit had a manufacturer's warning label on the windshield visible to anyone entering the vehicle, stating that audio and video recording was in operation. He paused. She included a handwritten note that said, and I'm quoting directly from a copy Vance Jr. found in his father's file, "Do not open unless something happens to me. If something does happen, give this to whoever needs it most." My throat closed. I sat down on the step beside him. Vance Sr. kept it sealed for 14 years, Ray continued. When he passed, the junior inherited the practice and the file. He gave it to me 3 days ago when I started the investigation. He looked at me carefully. I need you to know what's on it before I play it, Arthur, so you can decide how you want to hear it. Play it, I said. Ray pressed the spacebar. The recording quality was surprisingly clear for a device that old. There was ambient noise, road sounds, a car interior, the particular hum of a moving vehicle, and then a phone ringing through a car speaker, and then Julian's voice coming through sharp and immediate and completely recognizable. Yeah, it's done, Julian said. Marcus's voice answered. Cleaner, more controlled, the voice of a man who chose his words with professional precision, even in private. Completely. Reservoir cap. Took 30 seconds. She won't notice until she's already on the highway. A pause. The road sounds underneath. And you're certain she doesn't know anything? Marcus asked. She doesn't know anything, Julian said. She's Mom. She trusts everybody. The recording ended. 18 seconds. That was all it was. 18 seconds of audio that accounted for 15 years of grief and a funeral and a grave on a hillside in Lancaster. And every morning I had spent for a decade and a half believing my wife had died in a senseless accident. I stood up from the step. My legs carried me off the porch and onto the gravel, and I walked about 20 feet into the dark front yard and stopped. The cold hit me across the face, and the desert spread out all around me in every direction, enormous and indifferent and absolutely still. And I stood in the middle of it, with my hands clenched at my sides and my jaw locked, and my eyes burning so badly I could barely keep them open. I did not make a sound. I was not capable of making a sound. The thing moving through my chest was too large and too hot for sound. It was the kind of grief and fury that lives past language, past anything you can shape into words or tears or any form that another human being can witness. She had trusted everybody. That was what Julian said about his own mother. She trusts everybody. Like it was a weakness. Like it was her fault. Thomas appeared at my elbow. I had not heard him come out. He did not say anything. He simply stood beside me in the dark, with his hands in his jacket pockets, and let me have whatever I needed to have, which was the most useful thing anyone had done for me in 15 years. After a while, I could not have said how long I turned around and walked back to the porch where Ray was waiting. What does this do legally? I asked. My voice came out steadier than I expected. Ray set his coffee thermos down on the step. Under California law, a vehicle owner has the legal right to install and operate a dash cam with audio recording capability in their own vehicle, he said. The warning label on Mary's windshield satisfies the disclosure requirement under California Penal Code, Section 632. Anyone who entered that car was on notice that recording was in operation. The phone call came through her car's Bluetooth speaker system, which the dashcam captured as part of its continuous cabin audio recording. He met my eyes. The recording is clean, Arthur. Legally obtained on private property by the property owner with proper disclosure posted. Combined with the camera footage from this house and the bank transfer records, we have more than enough to take to the district attorney's office. This moves from civil to criminal. How fast can Vance Jr. move? I asked. He's already moving, Ray said. He called me an hour ago. Marcus filed the conservatorship petition this morning. He picked up the thermos again and looked at me over the rim. They don't know what we have. Marcus thinks he's playing offense right now. I looked out at the dark desert road where the headlights of a distant truck moved slowly east. Let him think that, I said. A little longer. Ray nodded. One more thing, he said, reaching into his jacket pocket and producing a folded sheet of paper. Vance Jr. found something else in his father's sealed file. An envelope addressed to you. He held it out. He said his father's instructions were to give it to you directly, not to open it himself. I took the envelope. My name on the front in Samuel Vance Sr.'s formal attorney handwriting. I did not open it that night. I put it in my shirt pocket against my chest, and I went inside and I sat with Thomas at the kitchen table while he made tea. Neither of us particularly wanted, and we talked about nothing important for an hour until the worst of it had settled enough to sleep. I opened the envelope from Samuel Vance Sr. at the kitchen table before sunrise. Inside was a single sheet of cream-colored stationery with the Vance Law Office letterhead at the top, dated August of 2009, the same month Mary had established the trust. The handwriting was formal and precise, the penmanship of a man trained when penmanship still mattered. Mr. Pendleton, if you are reading this, then the conditions your wife feared have come to pass, and the legal machinery she set in motion is now active. My son, Samuel Jr., has everything you will need. Go see him. He has been prepared for this moment his entire professional life. I am sorry for what your family has put you through. An old friend of your family always said your wife was the smartest person in any room she entered. I believe he was right. S.V. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully and placed it in the metal box beside Mary's journal. The drive to Winchester took 40 minutes. Samuel Vance Jr.'s office occupied the second floor of a converted Victorian on 6th Street above a title company and across from the county courthouse. The building smelled of old wood and coffee and the specific paper smell of a working law office that had been in the same location for a very long time. Vance Jr. was waiting at the top of the stairs. He was 48 years old, lean and slightly rumpled in the way of men who think faster than they dress, with his father's dark eyes, and a handshake that was firm without being performative. He wore a blue Oxford shirt with the sleeves rolled to the elbows and reading glasses pushed up on his forehead, and he moved through his office with the efficient ease of a man who knew exactly where every piece of paper in it was located. Mr. Pendleton. He shook my hand and gestured toward the chair across from his desk. I'm glad you came in person. This conversation is better face to face. I sat. He sat. He opened a folder on his desk and turned it so I could see the top document, the conservatorship petition filed yesterday morning at Los Angeles Superior Court by Julian Pendleton and Chloe Pendleton Webb, represented by their attorney, Marcus Webb. I leaned forward and read the first page. The petition alleged that Arthur James Pendleton, age 65, was suffering from progressive cognitive decline consistent with early-stage dementia, complicated by a terminal lung cancer diagnosis. that rendered him incapable of managing his own financial affairs, medical decisions, and daily living arrangements. It requested that the court appoint Julian Pendleton as full conservator of both the person and estate of Arthur Pendleton, with authority to make all medical and financial decisions on his behalf. I set the page down carefully. "He's asking for everything," I said. "He is," Vance confirmed. "Conservatorship of person and estate is the most comprehensive form of legal guardianship available under California Probate Code. If the court grants it, Julian would have the legal authority to control your bank accounts, your property, your medical treatment, your living arrangements, essentially every decision of any significance in your life." He paused to let that land. "He would also, as conservator of your estate, be positioned to challenge the trust itself on the grounds that you lack the capacity to have properly understood or maintained it." "Which is why Marcus needs the dementia diagnosis," I said. "Exactly." Vance leaned back in his chair. "The cancer diagnosis establishes medical vulnerability. The dementia allegation establishes cognitive incapacity. Together they create a legal argument that you should never have been left to manage your own affairs." He picked up his pen and tapped it once against the desk. "It's actually a well-constructed petition from a technical standpoint. If we didn't have what we have, it would be genuinely dangerous. But we do have what we have," I said. Something moved in Vance's expression, not quite a smile, but the thing that lives just behind a smile in the face of a man who has been waiting to say something for a long time. "Mr. Pendleton," he said, "your wife left us a case that I genuinely believe cannot be lost. The recording, the footage, the bank transfer, records, the trust documents, the DNA file, every piece of it is authenticated. Every chain of custody is clean. Every legal threshold is met or exceeded." He folded his hands. "Marcus Webb is an excellent litigator, but he built his strategy on the assumption that your wife left nothing behind. That assumption is going to cost him everything." My throat tightened. "What do we do first?" "First," Vance said, standing and moving to the window that overlooked the courthouse across the street, "I file our response to the petition, a comprehensive opposition that challenges every factual and legal basis of their claim. I attach a preliminary set of supporting documents." He turned to face me. "That will get Marcus's attention. He'll realize very quickly that this is not the uncontested proceeding he was expecting. And then we go to court." He said it simply, without drama. "The hearing is scheduled for the second week of January. That gives us approximately 3 weeks to prepare." He looked at me steadily. "I want to be honest with you, Arthur. The hearing is going to be difficult. They will say things about you and about Mary that are not true, and you will have to sit at that table and listen to them without responding. Can you do that?" I thought about the 18 seconds of audio, about Beverly Hills and the $300 in my shirt pocket, about Mary's handwriting on a note card she had written the morning she drove away. "Yes," I said. "I can do that." Vance nodded. He reached into his desk drawer and produced another folder thicker than the first with a colored tab on the side. "Then let's get to work," he said. "There's one more thing in your wife's file that I haven't shown you yet. I was waiting until you'd seen the petition first." He opened the folder and slid a sealed envelope across the desk toward me. The tab on the folder read, "DNA court use only." "My father's instructions," Vance said quietly, "were that this envelope be opened only in the presence of counsel immediately prior to the court hearing." He met my eyes. "I think you should know that what's inside is going to change the nature of this case significantly. Not just legally, personally." I looked at the envelope. My hands, I noticed, were completely steady. "Keep it sealed," I said, "until the courtroom." Vance studied me for a moment. Then he closed the folder over the envelope and nodded once with the quiet respect of a man who understands the difference between courage and performance. 3 weeks, he said. Let's make them count. The kitchen table disappeared under paper for 2 weeks. Ray Castillo drove up from Bakersfield 3 times during that period, each time arriving before 8 in the morning with a fresh legal pad and leaving after dark with another stack of annotated documents. Vance Jr. called every other day, sometimes twice. Thomas made coffee in quantities that suggested he had stopped thinking of it as a beverage and started thinking of it as a construction material. We built the case the way I used to build bridges, systematically, from the foundation up, checking every connection before moving to the next level. Ray organized the evidence into 4 categories, each in its own labeled binder. The financial records, Mary's journals, the bank transfer from Marcus to the LA medical practice, the loan receipts from Julian's years of borrowing. The legal documents, the trust, the Kern County registration, the notarized signatures, Dorothy's order book, with page 47 marked with a paperclip. The surveillance materials, the camera footage from the 2 nights Julian and Chloe had searched the house, transferred to a clean drive with timestamps, authenticated by a third-party digital forensics firm in Bakersfield. And the audio, the 18-second recording, its chain of custody documented from Mary's hands to Samuel Vance Sr.'s sealed file to Vance Jr.'s possession to Ray's verification. 4 binders, Ray said one afternoon, spreading them across the table. Each one is independently sufficient to win this case. Together he stopped, seemed to decide against whatever word he was reaching for, and settled on thorough. Mary was thorough, Thomas said from his chair by the window. He said it the way you state a fact about gravity. On the morning of this 10th day, Thomas came in from the utility closet carrying the metal box. He set it on the table and opened it and reached into the very bottom beneath the journals and the legal folder and produced a small envelope I had not noticed before. It was letter-sized, unsealed, with a single label on the front, in typed text, DNA analysis report, reference sample A and reference sample B, confidential. Bottom of the box, Thomas said. Mary told me it was there. She said don't mention it until the case was going to trial. I picked it up carefully. Do you know what it says? Thomas looked at me steadily. Mary told me enough, he said. I think you should read it before the courtroom, Arthur, not during. You'll want time to sit with it. I held the envelope for a long moment. Then I called Vance Jr. Samuel, I said when he picked up. The DNA envelope. I want to understand the methodology before we walk in there. How did Mary obtain the reference samples? Vance was quiet for a moment. My father's notes indicate that she brought 2 samples to the lab in September of 2009, he said carefully. One was taken from a used toothbrush buccal cells from the bristles which provide a reliable DNA profile. The other was from a razor skin cells collected from the blade. Another pause. Both sample types are standard in forensic DNA collection. She packaged them in separate sealed evidence bags and labeled each one with the date and source. The chain of custody is airtight. Whose hairbrush? I asked, though some part of me had already understood. Yours, Vance said quietly. And Julian's. I set the phone down on the table for a moment, picked it up again. And the results are in the envelope, Vance said. My father's instructions were clear. You read them first privately before anyone else. He said Mary insisted on that. I ended the call. Sat for a moment with the envelope in both hands. Then I opened it. I will not describe what I read in detail. Some things belong to the interior of a man's life and do not require a witness. I will say that I read the results twice, that I set the paper down on the table, with my hands flat on either side of it, and that I sat in that position for a long time while Thomas and Ray were quiet around me in the way of men who understood that silence was the only appropriate response to certain discoveries. What I will say is this: by the time I picked the paper up again, something had shifted in how I understood my own history. Not everything. Not the years of Saturday mornings and soccer games and homework at the kitchen table and the particular way a boy's laugh sounds when he is genuinely happy and does not know you are listening. Those were real. Those had happened. No document could reach back and unmake them. But some things I had believed about my life were not true. And I needed to know that before I walked into that courtroom so that the courtroom could not make me learn it for the first time. That night, I sat alone at the kitchen table after Thomas had gone home, and Ray had driven back to Bakersfield, and the house was quiet. I took a piece of paper from the drawer, plain white unlined, and I wrote a letter to Mary. I did not write about the case. I did not write about the courtroom or Marcus or the 4 binders or the 18 seconds of audio. I wrote about the summer of 1987 when we drove up the coast to Mendocino in a car with no air conditioning and sang along to the radio because the radio was the only thing in the car that worked. I wrote about the way she laughed when something caught her off guard, a short surprised burst like she hadn't seen it coming and was delighted that she hadn't. I wrote about the Tuesday mornings she brought coffee to my drafting table without being asked and sat on the edge of the desk reading while I worked, neither of us needing to speak. I wrote about the things I should have said more often, the things you think you have time to say. I folded the letter and put it in the metal box next to her journal. Then I went to bed, because tomorrow was the day before the hearing, and the day after that was the day I was going to walk into Los Angeles Superior Court and finish what my wife had started 15 years ago. I set my alarm for 5:30. I chose my suit before I turned off the light. The old navy blue one, the one I had worn the day I received my professional engineering license in 1985. It still fits. That seemed important, though I could not have explained exactly why. I turned off the light. Before I reveal what happened inside that courtroom, comment justice below so I know you are still here. Because what Samuel Vance placed on that table changed not just the case, it changed everything I believed about my own family for 40 years. One final note before we continue: portions of this story include fictional elements added to honor the emotional weight of experiences like this one. If you would rather not continue, we understand. But if you are staying, what comes next is the moment this entire story has been building toward. The Stanley Mosque Courthouse on Temple Street in Los Angeles was built in 1972 and looks like a long, flat-faced block of concrete and glass that communicates institutional authority without any particular warmth. I had driven past it dozens of times over the years without ever going inside. I had always considered that a reasonable state of affairs. Thomas drove. I sat in the passenger seat with my hands folded in my lap and watched the city come awake around us as we came down out of the Antelope Valley and into the basin, the skyline materializing through the morning haze, the freeways filling with the particular determined urgency of Los Angeles on a weekday morning. We did not talk much. Thomas had the radio on low, a classical station out of Pasadena, something with cellos. It was the right choice. Vance Jr. was waiting on the courthouse steps with Ray Castillo and 2 rolling briefcases. He had traded his rumpled Oxford for a dark charcoal suit that fit him precisely, and he moved with a focused, contained energy that told me he had been awake since well before sunrise and was exactly where he wanted to be. "How are you feeling?" he asked, falling into step beside me. "Like a man who has been waiting 15 years for a Tuesday," I said. He almost smiled. "Good. Hold on to that." The courtroom was on the 4th floor, Department 47, Judge Patricia Owens presiding. The room had the particular stillness of public buildings before the day's business begins, the air carrying the smell of old carpet and recycled air and decades of decisions made under fluorescent light. The gallery benches were wooden and hard, and already half filled when we arrived, which surprised me until I saw Dorothy in the fourth row, sitting ramrod straight, with her hands in her lap, and beside her, two people I recognized from Lancaster Boulevard. Gerald from the old Caltrans district office, and Patricia from the soccer league years. They had come without being asked. I had not even known they knew. Dorothy caught my eye and gave me one firm nod that communicated everything she needed to communicate. Across the aisle, Marcus sat at the opposing table reviewing documents with the deliberate calm of a man who believed this proceeding was already decided. He wore a suit that cost more than my first car and had arranged his papers with the precise geometry of someone who had done this many times and always won. Julian sat beside him in a new gray suit, his hair combed back, his face composed into an expression of concerned filial devotion that turned my stomach. Chloe was on Julian's other side, pale and rigid, her hands clasped on the table in front of her so tightly her knuckles had gone white. Judge Patricia Owens entered at 9 on the dot. She was 61 years old, compact and direct, with steel gray hair cut short and reading glasses on a chain around her neck that she deployed with efficient speed as she settled into her chair and opened the case file. She had the manner of a woman who had heard every variety of human dispute that could be brought into a courtroom and had long since stopped being surprised by any of them, but who had not stopped taking them seriously. This is the matter of the conservatorship petition filed by Julian Pendleton and Chloe Pendleton Webb regarding Arthur James Pendleton, she said without looking up from the file. Counsel, are we ready to proceed? Marcus stood. Ready, Your Honor. Vance stood. Ready, Your Honor. Marcus went first. He was good, I had to grant him that. He presented the medical evidence with the smooth, measured confidence of a man who had constructed this argument carefully and believed in its architecture. He walked Judge Owens through the cancer diagnosis, the oncologist's report, the documentation of cognitive decline, the alleged inability to manage financial affairs. He spoke about Arthur Pendleton with the careful compassion of a man who wanted the court to understand that this was being done out of love and concern for a vulnerable elderly father. I kept my face completely neutral. Vance had coached me on this specifically. Whatever you hear, he had said, your expression does not change. You are an engineer. You are reading a structural report. You are identifying where the load calculations are wrong. Then Vance stood up. He began with Mary's journals. He entered them into evidence with the authentication documentation, handwriting analysis, notarized dates, chain of custody from the metal box to Thomas's possession to the court. He read 3 short passages aloud, his voice measured and clear, letting the words do the work without editorializing. Judge Owens read along in the copies provided to the court. Her expression did not change, but her reading glasses came off her nose once, and she looked up at Vance for just a moment before putting them back. Then the trust documents, the Kern County registration, the notarized signatures, the conditional spendthrift trust in its complete form with Section 7 highlighted in yellow. Marcus objected twice. Judge Owens overruled him both times with the same 2 words delivered without inflection. Overruled. Continue. Then Vance paused. He walked back to our table and picked up the final folder, the one with the colored tab. He held it for a moment without opening it, and the quality of his stillness was such that the room went quiet in a way it had not been quiet before. Your Honor, he said, I have one final exhibit. Before I present it, I want to inform the court that its contents will bear directly on the standing of the petitioners to bring this action at all. He looked at Judge Owens. With the court's permission. Judge Owens set her pen down. Proceed, Mr. Vance. He opened the envelope. He read the results aloud in a clear, steady voice without preamble and without emphasis the way you read the load calculations on a bridge report, because the numbers speak for themselves and decoration only obscures them. Julian Pendleton shared no biological connection to Arthur James Pendleton. The room did not erupt. It went the opposite. It contracted a sudden sharp compression of air and attention, as though every person present had inhaled simultaneously and not yet exhaled. At the opposing table, Julian's composed expression did not shatter. It dissolved slowly from the outside in like frost melting off glass, until what was underneath was something I had never seen on my son's face before. Not anger, not defiance. Something much older and more unguarded than either of those things. Chloe made a sound, short and involuntary, bitten off immediately, her hand flying to her mouth. Marcus's pen stopped moving against his legal pad. He set it down with perfect control and stared at the documents in front of him. I looked at Julian across the room. 40 years. Saturday mornings and soccer games and homework at the kitchen table. A boy's laugh when he does not know you are listening. All of it real. All of it happened. And also this. Your Honor, Vance said into the silence. A petitioner who is not a biological relative and has not established legal standing through adoption has no recognized basis under California probate code to seek conservatorship of the subject's person or estate. He paused. The petition should be dismissed on standing alone. But we have additional evidence we believe the court will want to hear. Judge Owens looked at him over her reading glasses. Mr. Vance, she said, I think you had better continue. Vance walked to the evidence table and picked up a small portable speaker, the kind you could buy at any electronics store, matte black, about the size of a hardcover book. He connected it to his laptop with a short cable. The mundaneness of the equipment made it more terrible somehow. 18 seconds of audio that had ended a life stored in a device smaller than a brick. Your Honor, he said, this is People's Exhibit 7, a digital audio recording captured by a dashcam unit installed by Mary Pendleton in her personal vehicle mailed to Samuel Vance Sr. on March 8, 2010. 6 days before her death. He handed the authentication documents to the bailiff. I will note for the record that Mrs. Pendleton installed this dashcam system in her own vehicle and affixed the manufacturer's audio recording disclosure label to the windshield in full compliance with California Penal Code Section 632. Under California law, the owner of a private vehicle may lawfully record audio within that vehicle, provided disclosure is posted, which it was. The conversation between the parties was transmitted through the vehicle's Bluetooth speaker system and captured as part of the dashcam's continuous cabin audio recording. This evidence was lawfully obtained. Marcus was on his feet before Vance finished the sentence. Objection, Your Honor. Foundation. We have no verified evidence that the disclosure requirements were met or that the chain of custody is. The chain of custody documentation has been submitted as Exhibit 7A through 7D, Vance said without turning around. Vance Sr.'s signed receipt of the package, the United States Postal Service tracking record, the unbroken seal on the original envelope photographed before opening, a forensic authentication report from Meridian Digital Forensics in Bakersfield confirming the recording's timestamp and integrity, and Exhibit 7E, a photograph of the vehicle's windshield taken by the Lancaster County Sheriff's Office at the accident scene on March 15, 2010, clearly showing the manufacturer's audio recording disclosure label in place. Judge Owens looked at Marcus over her reading glasses. The objection is overruled. You may proceed, Mr. Vance. Marcus sat down. His jaw was tight enough that I could see the muscle working from across the room. He picked up his pen and held it without writing anything. Vance pressed play. The speaker was small, but the room was very quiet, and every word came through with a clarity that felt almost surgical. The road sounds first, the ambient hum of a moving vehicle, the soft rhythm of tires on asphalt. Then the phone ringing through the car speakers. Then Julian's voice, recognizable and immediate and completely unguarded. "Yeah, it's done." Marcus's voice cooler, more controlled. "Completely. Reservoir cap. Took 30 seconds. She won't notice until she's already on the highway." A pause. Road sounds. "And you're certain she doesn't know anything?" "She doesn't know anything. She's mom. She trusts everybody." Vance pressed stop. The room did not move for a full 3 seconds. Then Chloe Pendleton Webb made a sound that I will not try to describe, except to say that it was the sound of a person understanding something for the first time that changed the shape of everything they thought they knew. She pressed both hands over her mouth, and her shoulders heaved, and she turned to look at Julian, with her eyes streaming, and her whole face asking a question she already knew the answer to. Julian did not look at his sister. He stared straight ahead at the wall behind Judge Owens's bench, his face the color of old chalk, his hands flat on the table in front of him, absolutely motionless. The composed filial devotion he had walked in wearing that morning had been stripped away completely, and what remained underneath was something I had no name for, not guilt exactly, not fear exactly, but the specific blankness of a man whose architecture has collapsed and who has not yet started to understand what he is standing in. Marcus had stopped pretending to write. He sat with the pen in his hand and his eyes on the table in front of him and said nothing. For the first time since I had known him, Marcus Webb had nothing to say. At the petitioner's table, something was over. Judge Owens removed her reading glasses. She set them on the desk in front of her and looked at the room for a long moment, with an expression that was not angry. Anger would have been almost easier, but something closer to the specific exhausted sorrow of a person who has seen this particular human failure more times than she should have had to. "Mr. Vance," she said. Her voice was very controlled. "I am going to need a brief recess. When we return, I want to address several matters simultaneously." She looked at Marcus. "Mr. Webb, I strongly suggest you use the next 15 minutes to speak with your clients." She stood. The bailiff called the court to order. Everyone rose. In the hallway outside Department 47, I stood with Thomas against the wall, while the gallery emptied around us. Dorothy walked past and squeezed my arm once without stopping. Ray Castillo appeared at my elbow with 2 cups of water from the fountain down the hall and handed one to me without a word. "Are you all right?" Thomas asked. My chest hurt in the specific way it hurts when you have been holding something very tightly for a very long time and have just released it. Not relief, exactly. Relief would come later, maybe. What I felt in that hallway was something more like the moment after an earthquake, when the shaking stops, and you are standing upright, and the building is still standing, and you are doing the inventory room by room to understand what has held and what has not. "I'm upright," I said. Thomas accepted that. When court resumed, Judge Owens settled into her chair and opened the file and looked at the room with the calm deliberateness of a woman who had made her decision during the recess and was not going to be argued out of it. "The conservatorship petition filed by Julian Pendleton and Chloe Pendleton Webb is dismissed," she said. "With prejudice. The petitioners lack standing under California probate code, and the evidentiary record does not support any of the factual allegations contained in the petition." She turned a page. "Furthermore, this court is referring the audio recording admitted as Exhibit 7, along with the supporting documentation, to the Los Angeles County District Attorney's Office for review of potential criminal liability." She looked directly at Marcus. "I want to be clear that a referral of this nature is not a finding of guilt. It is a finding that the evidence warrants investigation by the appropriate authority." Marcus nodded once mechanically. "Mr. Pendleton, Judge Owens turned to look at me directly, and her voice changed, register slightly, still judicial, still controlled, but with something underneath it that was unmistakably human. The petition against you is dismissed in its entirety. You are free to go. She paused. I am sorry for what you have been put through in the course of these proceedings. This court wishes you well. I nodded. I did not trust my voice. We were gathering our materials when the door to the courtroom opened, and two officers from the Los Angeles Police Department came in moving with the unhurried purposefulness of people executing a warrant. They spoke briefly with the bailiff, who directed them to the petitioner's table. Julian stood when they reached him. His hands shook when he raised them. Marcus stood as well, and for just a moment, one brief, unguarded moment, the composure cracked entirely, and something raw and frightened showed through before he locked it back down. I did not watch the rest. I picked up my briefcase, nodded to Ray, and walked out of Department 47 with Thomas beside me. In the elevator going down, Thomas said, "She said you'd finish it." "I know," I said. "Did you?" I thought about the 4 binders, the 18 seconds, the lemon cake in Pasadena, the blue notebook at the bottom of the metal box. "We did," I said. "Mary and I." The elevator doors opened onto the lobby of the Stanley Mosque Courthouse, and we walked out into the January sunlight of Los Angeles. We were almost to the lobby when Vance caught up with us. "Arthur." He was slightly out of breath, his rolling briefcase clattering behind him on the marble floor. "There is one more piece. I should have told you this morning, but I didn't want to add anything else to what you were already carrying." He stopped, straightened his jacket. "I asked Judge Owens if she would hear one additional witness before we close the record. She agreed. It's Thomas." I turned to look at Thomas. Thomas was already nodding with the calm of a man who had been expecting this moment and had made his peace with it some time ago. "I told Samuel about 2 weeks ago," he said. "I should have told you directly. I'm sorry for that." "What are you going to say?" I asked. "The truth," Thomas said. "All of it. Mary made me promise I would if it ever came to this." We went back upstairs. Vance had held Thomas's testimony in reserve, deliberately entered into the supplemental record after the main petition was decided, so Marcus could not use it to complicate the primary proceedings. It was the cleaner approach. I understood that now. Judge Owens was still at her bench reviewing documents when we returned to Department 47. The gallery had thinned, most people had filed out after the arrest, but Dorothy was still there and Gerald and Ray Castillo in the back row, with his arms folded. The petitioner's table was empty. The absence of Julian and Marcus and Chloe from those chairs produced a specific quality of quiet that was different from any quiet I had experienced in that room before. "Mr. Vance," Judge Owens said, looking up, "I understand you have an additional witness." "Yes, Your Honor. Thomas Grayfield. He has information directly relevant to the welfare and circumstances of Mr. Pendleton over the past 15 years. Mr. Grayfield," Judge Owens gestured toward the witness stand. "Please proceed." Thomas walked to the stand, the way he walked everywhere, unhurried, straight-backed, with the particular economy of movement that belonged to men who had spent years in environments where wasted motion cost you something. He settled into the chair, adjusted the microphone, and folded his hands on the railing in front of him. Vance stood at the podium. "Mr. Grayfield, would you please state your full name and professional background for the record?" "Thomas Edward Grayfield," Thomas said. "I am a retired physician. I served as a United States Army medical officer for 22 years with 2 tours in field surgery. After leaving the military, I practiced emergency medicine in Los Angeles for 14 years before retiring in 2009. And your relationship to Arthur Pendleton. Thomas looked at me from the witness stand. His expression was very steady. I first met Arthur Pendleton in June of 1987, he said. He was the senior structural engineer on a highway overpass project in the Antelope Valley. There was a construction accident, a scaffolding failure, and Mr. Pendleton was injured. I was the physician on call at the nearest emergency facility. He paused. I treated him. He recovered fully. We did not maintain contact after that. And when did you next encounter Mr. Pendleton? I didn't encounter him, Thomas said. His wife encountered me. Mary Pendleton came to my office in the fall of 2009. She had tracked me down through a combination of Arthur's old medical records and what I can only describe as extraordinary persistence. He allowed himself one small, private smile. She explained the situation. She told me what she believed was going to happen to her husband after she was gone, and she asked me if I would be willing to help. What specifically did she ask? She asked me to retire to Lancaster, to live next door, to be present. Thomas spoke each sentence as a separate, complete unit. She set up a small retainer through the trust, enough to cover the medical supply costs I incurred providing what I can only describe as informal health monitoring. I arranged for Arthur's regular physician to receive anonymous supplemental information about his condition when I felt it was warranted. Nothing that would compromise his care or privacy. Just an extra set of eyes, an extra set of hands when necessary. Vance nodded. And why did you agree to do this? Thomas was quiet for a moment. He looked at his folded hands, then back up at Vance. Because Mary Pendleton asked me to, he said. And because in 40 years of medicine, I had met very few people who loved someone the way she loved her husband. When a person like that asks you to do something that costs you nothing except time and proximity, you say yes. He paused. You say yes because you want to know what it looks like. You want to be near it. The room was very still. From the gallery, Dorothy made a sound, quiet, barely audible, the sound of someone absorbing something that has taken a long time to arrive. Judge Owens set her pen down. She looked at Thomas for a long moment, with an expression that had moved entirely outside the boundaries of judicial neutrality. Then she picked her pen back up, which told me she had remembered where she was. Mr. Grayfield, she said, in your medical opinion formed over 15 years of observation, would you characterize Arthur Pendleton as a man suffering from cognitive decline or diminished capacity of any kind? Thomas looked at her directly. No, Your Honor. I would characterize him as one of the sharpest people I have ever spent 15 years trying to keep up with. From somewhere in this gallery, Gerald laughed a short, surprised sound that he stopped immediately. Judge Owens did not smile, but her pen moved across the page with a slightly different quality. Thank you, Mr. Grayfield, she said. You may step down. Thomas came back to our table. I had not planned what happened next. I had not thought about it or rehearsed it or decided in advance that I was going to do it. He came around the end of the table and I stood up and reached out my hand and he took it. And we held on for a long time, not a shake exactly, more like two people gripping the same rope after a long climb. And neither of us said anything, because there was nothing that needed to be said that the grip itself did not already communicate. 15 years. An old house on Miller Creek Road. A man who had been a neighbor and was something considerably more than that. Mary chose well, I said finally. My voice came out rough at the edges. Thomas gripped harder for 1 second, then released. She always did, he said. Vance was gathering his folders. He looked up and caught my eye. There's one more thing, he said quietly. Dr. Foster is at Antelope Valley Hospital waiting for us. And after that, he paused. Come to my office tomorrow morning, Arthur. There is a final layer to the trust. I've been waiting to show it to you until everything else was settled. I looked at him. Is it good news? Vance almost smiled. It was the closest thing to a full smile I had seen from him all day. It is, he said, the most merry thing you have ever seen in your life. Antelope Valley Hospital smelled the way all hospitals smell: antiseptic and recycled air, and the particular flatness of a building where the windows do not open. Dr. Elaine Foster was waiting in a consultation room on the second floor. She was 52, precise and direct, with short, dark hair and the manner of a physician who considered extra words a form of malpractice. She shook my hand once and gestured to the chair across from her desk. "Mr. Pendleton," she said, opening the folder in front of her. "I've completed a full pulmonary workup. CT scan, blood panel spirometry. I want to go through the results with you directly." "Please," I said. She turned the folder so I could see the imaging report. "Your lungs are clear," she said. "No masses, no nodules, no markers consistent with malignancy of any kind. Your pulmonary function is that of a healthy man in his early 60s. She looked at me steadily. "You do not have lung cancer, Mr. Pendleton. You did not have lung cancer when that original diagnosis was made. The report you received was fabricated." The room was very quiet. I had known this was coming. Ray had shown me the bank transfer weeks earlier, the $40,000 moving from Marcus's account to the physician's practice 6 months before my diagnosis. I had carried that knowledge for weeks. And yet hearing it stated plainly by a doctor in a consultation room produced a sensation I had not anticipated, not relief exactly, but the vertiginous, slightly nauseating feeling of a floor dropping away beneath your feet, followed by the discovery that you were never standing where you thought you were. "He needed me sick," I said. My voice came out flat and factual, the way I used to report structural failures to project supervisors. If I wasn't sick, the dementia story had no foundation. The whole conservatorship argument depended on me being terminal. "That appears to be correct," Dr. Foster said. "Ray Castillo's financial records establish a direct payment from Marcus Webb to the diagnosing physician prior to your examination. The district attorney's office will determine the criminal implications, but from a medical standpoint—" She closed the folder. "You are in excellent health." Ray appeared in the doorway. "Chloe signed divorce papers this afternoon," he said without preamble. "Marcus's attorney confirmed it. She's cooperating with the DA's investigation in exchange for reduced civil liability." He paused. "She called the house on Miller Creek Road about an hour ago." Thomas answered. "She asked him to tell you she was sorry." I thought about Chloe's white knuckles in the Beverly Hills kitchen, her voice breaking on Daddy when she saw me in Lancaster. The way she had stood at the guest room door the night Julian searched the study, arms wrapped around herself, wanting to stop something she had already agreed to be part of. "Tell Thomas to tell her I heard her," I said. Ray nodded and stepped back into the hallway. I stood up, shook Dr. Foster's hand, and walked out of the consultation room into the hospital corridor. Thomas was leaning against the wall with 2 cups of terrible vending machine coffee, holding one out as I approached. I took it. It was hot and bad and exactly right. "Healthy lungs," Thomas said. "Healthy lungs," I confirmed. He looked at me with the expression of a man absorbing good news he has been waiting a long time to receive. "Mary would have laughed at that," he said. I thought about her laugh, the short, surprised burst of it, the way it arrived before she could stop it. "Yes," I said, "she absolutely would have." The final layer of Mary's trust took 6 weeks to process. Vance Jr. called on a Thursday morning in early March and said the paperwork was ready. I drove to Winchester alone. The almond trees along Highway 14 were in full bloom, white blossoms, against a blue sky, the kind of California morning that makes you believe things can actually start over. Vance's office smelled of coffee and old wood. He was already at his desk when I arrived, a folder open in front of him and an expression on his face that I had not seen before, that something quieter than professional satisfaction, something closer to wonder. "Sit down, Arthur," he said. I sat. He opened the folder and turned it toward me. Inside was a stock certificate, formal notarized, bearing the name of a company I recognized immediately. Pacific Span Construction Group, the company that had terminated my employment in 2001, after 31 years of service citing budget restructuring. The company whose bridges I had designed, whose load calculations I had verified, whose name appeared on plaques on overpasses across the state of California. 30%, Vance said quietly. Your wife used trust assets to acquire 30% of Pacific Span Construction Group's outstanding shares over a period of 8 years through a series of anonymous holding accounts. Pacific Span, the firm that used your design patents without proper licensing, that brought you on as a consultant, and eliminated your position 4 months later while keeping every calculation you produced. He paused. As of last week, the board has been formally notified of the beneficial owner. They have requested a meeting, Arthur. They would like to offer you the position of honorary chairman, which means every bridge project Pacific Span bids on in partnership with Caltrans going forward will carry your signature of approval. I looked at the certificate for a long time without speaking. Then Vance slid one more page across the desk. A single sheet handwritten. The last page of the blue journal. Arthur, I know you never cared about being recognized for the bridges. You built them because they needed to be built and you knew how. But I cared. I cared because I watched you give Pacific Span your best work, your calculations, your patents, your precision, and I watched them hand you a cardboard box and a 4-month severance like none of it had ever mattered. It mattered. You mattered. The bridges you designed are still standing across this state. They will be standing long after all of this is over. I just wanted to make sure your name was attached to them in a way that no one could ever take back. All my love, always Mary. I read it twice. Then I folded it carefully and put it in my shirt pocket. I thanked Vance. I shook his hand. I drove home. Thomas was on the porch when I pulled into the driveway on Miller Creek Road, 2 cups of coffee on the railing. The March sun was doing what it does in the high desert in early spring, laying itself flat across the land in long gold sheets, turning the sand and the sage and the old brick of the house into something that looked almost luminous. I sat down beside him and picked up the cup he had left for me. We did not talk for a while. The desert was quiet. A red-tailed hawk was working a thermal somewhere to the south, circling in long, patient arcs. The lavender along the front walk had begun to show the first gray-green of new growth. Well, Thomas said finally, I thought about how to answer that. I thought about Beverly Hills in the rain, and a taxi on a November night, and a porch light burning in a house that was not supposed to be lit. I thought about a blue notebook, and 18 seconds of audio, and a lemon cake in Pasadena, and a man who had spent 15 years being a neighbor. I thought about the bridges, still standing. My name attached to them properly at last. She thought of everything, I said. Thomas picked up his coffee. The hawk made another slow circle against the blue. Yes, he said, she did. I have built bridges my entire life. But the most important ones, I almost let them collapse without noticing. Do not wait until someone is gone to understand what they gave you. Do not be like me. Look around right now. The person sitting quietly beside you, showing up without being asked, keeping promises no one else remembers, that is your bridge. Build toward them while you still can. God places certain people in our lives not to be seen, but to hold everything together from the shadows. Mary was that person for me. Maybe you have someone like that too. These grandpa stories, These quiet family stories of sacrifice and love are not just from small towns or distant memories. They live in New York kitchens, in New York living rooms, in families across this country who never got the chance to say thank you out loud. If this family story moved you, if it reminded you of a grandfather, a father, someone who loved you in silence, share it. Someone in your life needs to hear it today. Leave your thoughts in the comments. Subscribe so these grandpa stories and New York voices never pass you by. Thank you for staying until the very end. Some stories here contain fictional elements crafted for reflection and meaningful storytelling. If that is not what you are looking for, we understand completely. But if you are still here, so are we.